although I'll talk about this project in terms of its progressive development, it's still evolving and is open for conversations. To give you a context of the project, it's located in the northeastern corner of India, just tucked between Southeast Asia and mainland India. The project has used one of the major rivers in Asia, the Brahmaputra, that flows through the region, and its riverfronts as sites for these experiments in creative placemaking. And this project, all the 3 stages transpired in this city called Guwahati, which is located on the southern bank of the river. You can see that the Brahmaputra it originates somewhere in Tibet, flows all the way through the plains of Assam, draining into the Bay of Bengal here with the Ganges. So these are really questions and initiations and not finite entities. And these questions have evolved over the years out of my love for genius loci, placemaking, creative placemaking, and questions like how can we create a sense of belongingness in a place with people at the core, and how can I bring my love for craft forms, vernacular architecture, and the landscape together to evoke a sense of place. And these questions really in a city that's unsettling and relentlessly changing. So the river and this whole idea of a journey are cultural icons that have defined the spirit of this place for me. As an artist, I view the river as a fluid space that offers a lot of entry points for exploring multiple realities, memories, lives, and identities. And at this point, the project is, at a point where it's open to a lot of potential. I visualize it as a receptacle for, circumstances and as a circumstance for unprecedented events, thought-provoking experiences, and also the project sort of seeks to open up new ways of encountering and experiencing the environment. The project is drawn from ideas in placemaking. We know that placemaking is a multifaceted approach to design of public spaces that originated in the 1960s. And placemaking really focuses on community assets and shared potentials of a particular place. And it's community-based, community-driven, transformative, visionary, open-ended, flexible, and all of those things. And in this project, I've used ideas of creative placemaking. And creative placemaking is when you strategically shape the character and the physical and the social character of a place around arts and cultural activities. Here I want to particularly talk about this person you probably haven't heard of. I consider him a Renaissance man born in the 15th century. He was a polymath, placemaker, saint scholar, poet, playwright, socio-religious reformer, all rolled into one. He is credited with building on past relics to come up with new forms of theater, performance art, linguistics, whole new language. He was working actually around the same time as Leonardo da Vinci. Da Vinci was drawing on the intersection of the arts and the sciences, and Srimanta Shankardev was drawing on the intersection of art and culture, bringing the arts in a very interdisciplinary way. And all of his ideas sort of developed physically into these structures called satras or monasteries. I call them placemakers or nodes of culture that are strewn all over the region. And they sort of became these platforms and places for bringing together the arts in an interdisciplinary way, bringing together craft forms like mask making, bare metal crafts, dances, theater, and linguistics. So I have been drawing upon my background in the visual arts, architecture, and cultural studies to sort of come up with a new hybrid interdisciplinary practice. Trying to come up with a practice that is not as easily slottable as visual arts, architecture, or cultural studies, but something that forms a continuum between the three. I was drawing on parts of architecture, parts of art, and looking at cultural studies as sort of a linkage between them to make this new practice more critically engaged. In my visual arts practice, I was looking at the intersection of the painting, space, culture, ecology. In the architecture, I was looking at culturally and environmentally responsible buildings. I'm particularly inspired by the Japanese architect Rubin. You must have heard of him. He's an international architect who has done innovative work with paper, particularly paper tubes that he's used for humanitarian purposes. His work really blurs the boundaries between arts, architecture, and social practice. I particularly like the way he has used basketry patterns and weaving patterns in his architecture. And then cultural studies is another field that I've been drawing from. In my case, I was doing this research at the University of Oregon, where I was looking at vernacular patterns of the Northeast India, and I was comparing and contrasting them with patterns with certain communities in Southeast Asia. And this was based on the premise that despite political boundaries, this whole region sort of comprises one geopolitical entity with connections that are historic and anthropological and kinship-based. So all these ideas started coalescing together and evolving into these projects that started transpiring in the public realm. It's a series of interventions, ongoing, it's trying to sort of challenge the traditional boundaries between arts and crafts, artist, artisan, public, private, inside, outside, and trying to bring in the culture of crafts, architectural traditions, environmental concerns of the Eastern region and beyond in an interdisciplinary way, trying to also create participatory public art at the same time. All these ideas sort of started coalescing around the end of 2011 and 12, when the first stage took place, and the subsequent stages they built upon the previous stage, and right now currently in stage 3 in 2014. So the first stage was really about delving deeper into the cultural forms that I love. I was trying to look at these craft forms in an inherently new way, as reflective of people, histories, passions, beliefs beyond just craftsmanship and materials. So I was doing a lot of sketching and studies and drawings. The idea was about extracting value from bamboo, which is the primary resource in the region with embedded culture, and asking questions like, what gets left behind when the function and the meaning is taken away? What can be reclaimed? And can the reclaimed become a catalyst for new meanings and reimaginations? So I collaborated with a group of bamboo craftsmen to create these site-specific installations in the public realm. The installation sort of evoked local craftsmanship and distorted it at the same time. It was pushing the boundaries of bamboo crafts and forms. Very thin strips of bamboo from the outer layers were used to create these installations. As a painter, I was also interested in sort of painting sensually with bamboo in real time and space, creating these three-dimensional gesture and abstractions. The idea was also, about magnifying scale and distorting geometry and sort of creating whimsy, picking out certain cultural forms to see how their hyperbolic forms could lead to, what kind of spatial manifestations could they lead to. And then I was also working on some of these smaller cultural forms or craft forms, like basketry and fish traps, trying to work on them with fine strips of cloth and sticky clay. This is an ancient mask-making technique still used in the satra that I showed you earlier. The idea was to kind of shift the meanings of these very functional objects to sort of forms and non-objects, to try and look at them in a whole new way. So trying to again relook at them in inherently new ways. These forms, which are usually transparent, utilitarian objects, were transformed into abstractions. into sort of pure, the language, the basic language of art, pure forms, geometries, and solids, lines, space, trying to blur the boundaries between arts and crafts. So being in the public realm offered this opportunity for interactions with the general public beyond the usual art lover, and that led to through the conversations I realized that the public they were able to look at their own culture in a whole different way, and there was a kind of a more critical way of looking at the things they were used to, and that was the first stage, and that led to sort of the second stage, which became a much larger project where it was a process of slowing down. The slowest journey on the river Brahmaputra. A bamboo raft was created and conceptualized, inspired by the folklore and the sustainable principles surrounding these vernacular bamboo rafts that are floated down the river throughout the year. The raft was sort of visualized as a visual performance art space and a sustainable habitat that could be anchored like a boat or a ferry. Two collective cultural journeys were launched on the river, one last year and one this year, to explore this whole idea of a journey as performance, and also to sort of initiate a dialogue on how to live, how can we coexist sustainably with the environment. So in trying to form the conceptual framework for these projects, I used 4 key ideas of social sculpture, itinerant barn, sustainable habitat, and collective cultural journey, taking from Joseph Beuys. If you've heard of Joseph Beuys, his idea of an expanded definition of art, where you're exploring the social, cultural, and political role of art. The idea of the itinerant barn, the bamboo raft was reimagined as the itinerant barn of the river, a wanderer, so to speak, sort of evoking the wanderer in each one of us. And that was based on the philosophies and the humanism of a folklorist and musician called Rubin who's from that region. And this idea of the sustainable habitat being, trying to evoke these universal, mobile, temporary habitats with minimal impacts. And this whole idea of the collective cultural journey, this idea of the journey as a performance and collective journey as a journey of transformations. So the creation of the raft, involved collaborative work between bamboo artisans, diverse artists, rafters, boat makers, and the idea for bringing on board different groups of people with their own knowledge systems was again to create circumstances for unanticipated convergence of disciplines. The project was able to galvanize a group of people from diverse backgrounds, a loose collective of artists, artisans, filmmakers, folklorists, writers, movement artists, dancers, photographers have come together, and they continue. It's like a group, a loose collective with totally non-hierarchical. So the raft structure, as a piece of public art, it was able to, establish this very censor-free means of contact with the community, creating new ways of encountering and experiencing the environment. So Publix used the raft as a gathering space, as a community space, for impromptu musical concerts, as a landmark for creating photographic memories, even when it was not complete. It was still being completed by the riverfront. So the inaugural collective cultural journey was launched last year. During the journey, the raft structure and the collective journey sort of became an arena for impromptu cultural exchanges between performers on board, blurring the boundaries between art and life. Around 30 performers came together to create performances that range from storytelling to dance, dance performance movements, to poetry performances, and just to informal conversations. And They were loosely structured around like artistic, cultural, and environmental issues that reflected the interests of the members of the collective. Again, the collective cultural journey involved active listening to the river, just listening to what the river has to say, and it reflected this very non-linear, experimental, open-ended, pluralistic process of the project itself, where you're open to sort of all sorts of alternative possibilities. So again, during the collective cultural journey, the idea was about breaking hierarchies, hierarchies between different classes of people, and bringing them all together in one space. That was done through collective performance and collective storytelling. The raft structure, in its anchored state at the riverfront, offered this immense possibility of reaching out to a whole range of publics beyond just the art lover, the typical museum goer, or the gallery viewer. And through a series of thought-provoking events, experiences, and spaces. So during this stage, we launched a series of initiatives, and the floating raft structure really wanted to become a platform for events at the interface of art, culture, environment, and vernacular crafts. This is an event that was called Exploring Identities. This person, a very prominent artist, installation artist, folklorist, and a teacher brought together about 20 students from across various schools, artist collectives, and nonprofits with different backgrounds to sort of experiment with a performance installation on the floating space of the raft. The idea was to sort of generate interest in artists and the public about the condition of the river, and also to talk about, making our public spaces more accessible and safe. And they were also exploring various issues of personal and collective identities besides environmental concerns. So again, another initiative called the Tree Line at the Edge of Arts and Crafts was launched early this year. The whole idea was to bring together groups of artists and artisans to collaborate with each other and see where boundaries blur. The idea was to transform the three-dimensional space of the raft itself. And so this is what transpired. Of course, there were other conceptual frameworks like the mythical tree, and we used a series of prints and paintings to converse, to sort of translate from 2-dimension to 3-dimension. And how do you infuse a space, a public space, with meaning? So for that, there was an interdisciplinary event that brought together the paintings that were the initial inspiration for it. Another initiative tried to explore this whole idea of site-specific performance, and tried to create a performance-based work set at the riverfront. This particular one brought stories from the island of Majuli upstream that I spoke about earlier, and tried to adapt it to the floating space of the raft. This was the first time a proscenium piece was adapted to the public realm. So there's been a series of initiatives, one after the other, that sort of brought forth various ideas. This was an urban walk led by a group of poets and writers that explored the sites of personal histories and colonial past through the lens of literature, using autobiography, literature, and literary metaphors to look critically at the colonial past. Again, this was the second collective cultural journey that became a platform for a sound-based experiment. So what happened is there were a lot of experiments, non-linear, non-narrative sound experiments we did while on board during the journey. And we have a soundtrack now that hopefully will become part of a larger project to document everyday rhythms, work sounds, ethnic chants, sounds of nature, sounds of the river. I have the track with me. I don't think I have time to play it. So hopefully that will become a much larger project, as a start of a much larger project. So I wanted to mention that, during the journey and through the project, there's this constant tension between the intellectual and the physical, this very physical act of building, creating this oaring, sailing, and the journey itself, and these very intellectual and artistic experiments going alongside. So there's this constant tension between the two. So this was another initiative which brought back this whole idea of social sculpture, that art can happen in any culture, at any time, by anybody, at any space. But bringing back this element, this basic bamboo bowl, which had formed one of the initial inspirations for the creation of the upper form of the raft. And one of the details, that the rim detail was actually the detail we used in the 3 dimension to sort of hold the upper form in place. So we're trying to bring it back and alter the scale, and sort of, it was a very short 1-day sculpture that just galvanized a group of artists and artisans. Another initiative that tried to reinvigorate and revitalize a very passive archaeological site by the river, and tried to integrate the river with the archaeological site by engaging with the historical and the mythological narrative of the site. It also led to some impromptu sound experiments that we incorporated in the soundtrack. So at this point, the questions are still evolving, and the questions I ask is, how can I keep sort of expanding on this project as a social catalyst to use it for transformations? And how can I expand on each one of these initiatives and can I expand on each one of these initiatives to come up with a singular vision or a sort of a public art program for the region or for the city? And also recognize that it takes time for a community to become participants in a public art process and to engage in a process. And how do I sort of maintain those valuable networks and connections over a period of time? Because I'm not there now, I'm here, but the project is still ongoing. And how do we do that in community-based work? And also, sort of, how do we evaluate the impact, a sustained value of a project like this? Because it takes time, and the impacts may transpire over a period of time. And how do we do a study of that? These are the questions that I've been thinking about right now as I am, away from the project itself. So yeah, the hope is that it has opened up new possibilities of reading and understanding the river and the city, and new ways of sort of creating better places to make better lives.